Hello, good evening and welcome to the TNT Show. Now, I have to say something up front immediately before you all rush off, those of you who are watching rather than listening, to adjust your screens. It's not you, it's me. I managed to catch a blink or two of sunshine today, and in the finest Scottish traditions, I threw myself into it shamelessly. And the result is that I now have a very red visage. It's not your screen. Don't adjust it. I'm afraid you're stuck with what you see, as am I, as it turns out. Well, as you know, we're into our second century of shows. I'm your host for the next 60 minutes. And thanks to you, the TNT Show and Indie Live are growing and delivering more exciting shows. So while the BBC is in decline, in fact, Indie Live is in the ascendancy, thanks to you. By the way, you can watch the TNT Show on IndieLive.net, streamed out on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. Plus, if you go onto YouTube, you can catch all the previous shows as well. Well, you know, it's been another great day for British democracy. We learned that the UK growth is expected to be the worst in the G20, apart from Russia, and they're presently at war. My word. Meanwhile, it seems that A&E services in some hospitals south of the border have ground to almost a complete halt. Torby Hospital, for example, right now has 12, that's right, 12 ambulances queued outside. Westminster's response? We are told they have recruited a retired general who's going to sort things out. No mention of how we got into this predicament, but anyway, this nice man is going to sort things out. Good luck with that. Well, tonight we are talking to a very special guest. We'll be discussing digital media with Olaf Stando. Olaf is a new Scot, independence activist and anti-austerity campaigner. So he's got his work cut out. And he's also serving as the international officer for the SNP's youth wing and supporting the Yes campaign wherever he can. Olaf is here for a full hour and he is taking your questions live. And there's still time to get your question considered. You'll find the details at IndieLive.net. As you know, TNT stands for The Nation Talks. So this is very much your show. We're live and we're free. So no license, no problem. Now, to our guest tonight. Tonight, The Nation talks to Olaf Stando. Thanks for joining us, Olaf. How are you?
Well, thanks very much, John. It's great to be here. I'm very good. I wasn't quite as lucky to have sun where I am in Fife. So I'm a lot more white. I don't quite have the red edifice. But it's matching your screen very well, so it's all good.
Good.
Yeah, feeling good. Feeling excited about the path towards independence. Feeling excited about the summer. Feeling busy but good.
Good. Well, if you're excited about summer, don't do what I did. I
mean, summer is a bit of an abstract concept in Scotland, but listen, we'll just play along with it.
Well, as the old joke goes, Olaf, summer in Scotland is usually a Wednesday, but sometimes it can be a Tuesday. Depending on how
it's on weekends and it's on weekends. Yeah, it's a mystery.
So where are you from originally?
So I was born in Poland, in a city called Wrocław, pretty close to the German and the Czech border in the southwest. And yeah, just lived there with my parents. And we moved to Scotland when I was 10 years old, just coming up to 11. It was shortly after Poland's joined the EU. So I was, one of the first sort of wave of immigrants coming to the UK. And yeah, it's been a while, but I go back every now and then because I've got grandparents still in Wrocław, so I go back sort of once or twice a year.
Yeah.
But I definitely feel like it's been a very long time, and every time I go back to Poland, it's sort of wow, this is not very much my country anymore.
It's interesting. My daughter-in-law is Polish, and she comes from a place called, and you'll have to forgive my accent because it's very poor, Gliwice.
Gliwice.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was the Katowice. Yes.
Yeah.
That's right.
And I visited there when my grandson was being baptized. We went there, and it was great fun. We actually had a very liquid celebratory lunch in a
typical
in a restaurant called Secession, which I thought was intriguing. Yeah.
fitting.
This is-
It must have been destiny.
It must be
Serendipity.
this. It's fate. It's kismet. It's kismet. Okay.
Uh,
So
so-
we talked about you being an independent activist. What, and you're interested, obviously, in anti-austerity. What are your specific thoughts on the way things are just now? You've seen the vote. A whole bunch of Tories MPs voted against their own prime minister. If you had to put your forecasting hat on and look down the pike, as the Americans say, how do you see things working out?
Well, I think the whole Boris Johnson confidence vote is a bit of a charade, and actually what it does is it demonstrates how anti-democratic the whole system is, that Scotland's future, Scotland's constitutional future and Scotland's government is being decided by a handful of Tory MPs, all from very similar backgrounds, all from, coming from the same perspective and coming from the perspective of, wanting to get re-elected, coming from a self-serving perspective and not really caring much about Scotland at all. And you see that in, Douglas Ross's flip-flopping and the constant changing of positions and how sidelined the Scottish Tories have become, and nobody really pays attention to them anymore, which kind of demonstrate, even if even the Scottish Tories can't command authority within the UK Conservative Party, Scotland has no chance at all. Scotland is an afterthought to the UK government, which is tragic. And I think there's been so much obsession about the bean counting and the gossip and the speculation of will he go, will he not, will he resign? And to be honest, it doesn't really matter to me. I've not been that interested, because if he is forced out, and look, I hope he is, because even though he's a great recruiter for the cause of independence, he's also a charlatan and a liar, and he degrades politics for everybody, and he does not deserve to be in any sort of office, let alone the office of Prime Minister. But even if he does resign or is forced out, it just means that we get another Tory hard right replacement, keen on imposing Brexit, keen on imposing austerity, keen on immiserating lives of working class people and people all across the UK. That is the problem. And I think that really illustrates why we have to get independence and break ourselves away from this broken Westminster failed circus that we're in right now, because whether it's Boris or not, we're all losers in the system.
Yeah. It's very sad to think that he might be replaced by someone who is just as frightful as he is.
I mean, to be honest, he's not exactly an ideological Tory. Like the only ideology that Boris Johnson has is Boris Johnson. He cares only about self-preservation. So if he's replaced by, the likes of Rishi Sunak or Les Truss, people that are much more, British nationalist in their skin and bones and really obsessed with driving a Thatcherist agenda, at a time like this, at a time when child poverty is at a record high, at a time when inflation is tearing through people's wallets, like that would be a lot worse, actually. So, the future is not looking bright with the Tories in charge.
Yeah, and what do you think of Keir Starmer? What do you, when you look at Keir Starmer, what do you think?
Oh my God, the PMQs today was dreadful, wasn't it? He had a massive open goal in front of him, and he just missed it within inches of it. Look, Keir Starmer is an opportunistic leader. He, again, similar to Boris Johnson, is willing to put principles to the fire to get elected. I remember when he stood on a sort of left-wing polished Corbynite platform, he promised nationalizing energy. He promised things like standing up for free movement, standing up against Brexit. He promised all that to get elected, and then once he got elected, he put these principles in the bin. And his constant posing with Union Jacks and talking about wanting to be patriotic and about wanting to make Brexit work and all that, it really is quite pathetic for a Labour leader who should be providing opposition and just isn't. And we've seen that today at PMQs, actually. Ian Blackford, consistently more effective at opposition than Labour. And he got straight to the point. Ian Blackford said what we're all thinking about Boris Johnson and about, how is this man still in office? And he actually got a lot more credit for it from media and people online and so on. So,
I think that was interesting. He made a very good point about the fact that he stands up every week and asks for the guy's resignation, and there's always baying and animal from the Tory MPs. And he says he always thought that was people supportive of him. In fact, it was people who wanted rid of the Prime Minister. But it's interesting too. A lot of people in Scotland are very confused about his position. One is on Brexit, in which he seems to be claiming, hey, this has to go ahead. By hook or by crook, we have to press on with this. And the second thing is, I'll have no truck with any deals with the SNP. Now, this is not grown-up politics, it seems to me. People listening to that must be thinking, you need to go off and have a cold shower and come back and have a real think about this. Because the likelihood is if he gets in, he will scrape in by his fingernails.
Yeah.
And he will be very much dependent, not just upon the SNP, but other parties too, I would imagine. What's your take on that?
Tories have actually already started this strategy of, painting Labour as, they're going to be weak and they're going to be in hock to the SNP, the classic Labour SNP coalition line. We've heard it all before. We've heard it in 2015, obviously, with the infamous poster, and I think it was Ed Miliband with Alex Salmond in his pocket, the opposite. And 2019, it's constantly what they're using. And with the whole pandering to Brexit, look, Keir Starmer is obviously interested in winning back a lot of votes in the north of England, and electorally, it might make sense for him to target those people. I mean, obviously, if he wants to get a majority or anything near a majority, he has to get some of those Brexit voters, right? But in Scotland, what this actually shows is that, again, this system is so uneven structurally that the north of England and the English electoral considerations always trump Scotland's interests, right? The path to government, the path to majority in the Westminster system is not going through Scottish seats. They're not essential to getting a majority because there's so few of them, less than 10% in Westminster. So again, it underlines that sort of thing that England wants something and Scotland has to get along with it, no matter what we actually want or what we voted for. And with Keir Starmer's pandering to Brexit, you see that crystal clear. I think also it's really sad to see for a party that's supposedly socialist or social democratic, pandering to a project that is just right wing by design, by nature. Brexit originates from the likes of Nigel Farage. Brexit originates from those who want to deregulate the economy and burn workers' rights and so on. And I think if Keir Starmer is going ahead with it, going along with it, supporting it in full, knowing that Brexit's hurting the economy so much, it makes you question whose interest is he actually in favour of, and who's he standing up for?
I think my worry is maybe I come at this maybe from a more less political, maybe a more moral stance, which is that I always assumed that the reason that the Red Wall fell to Johnson was because Brexit was a dog whistle for we're opposed to immigration. Yeah, and that because you have to ask yourself why millions of working class people decided to vote for Johnson. It's hard to see how they could develop much empathy on a personal level. And since nobody knows much about his politics, and even the politics he does tell you about, it can change in an instant. So there had to be some specific that they related to in Johnson's approach, and that's what worries me when I see Starmer, as it were, climbing up the same tree, rather than sort of taking a principled approach of saying, look, this was all a great big mistake. I recognize it for what it is, and I'll have no truck with it.
Well, it's harder, isn't it, to outline a vision for actually, I'm not saying necessarily reversing Brexit, because obviously people in England wanted Brexit. I'm not advocating that the whole of the UK reverses Brexit, because that has been, after all, a democratic decision of people in England and in Wales. But it's the lack of honesty, isn't it, that it's easier to just go along with sound bites, make Brexit work, carry on the same trajectory as the Tories, without really wanting to spell out a different alternative, a Labour alternative. I think it just shows the spinelessness, really, of Keir Starmer, and it shows that his priority is getting into power at any cost. And it shows that actually, again, under this two-party system of Westminster, Labour and Tories, two cheeks of the same coin. We're doomed, aren't we? We're doomed because there is no alternative. And it's also bad for the politics system in general. It's bad for engagement. It's bad for showing people that, look, there is something worth voting for. And if you only look at politics through the frame of Westminster, Labour or Tory, it kind of makes you disengaged and makes you switch off a wee bit, because what is there to vote for if you're in England and if you're a progressive?
Don't you think that's the point, though? The whole point of Johnson's approach, really, it's not a terribly hidden agenda. It's to turn people off the whole idea of politics. Now, I suspect his notion, and it's fairly blatant, is to say, look, I'm a crook, I'm a liar, but you know something? We're all the same.
Yeah. No, exactly.
If you can, it's the Trump approach. If you can tar all politicians with the same brush, you can drop the turnout, elections, etc. And it makes it easier for you to, particularly under a first past the post system, is to slip a few candidates in there that you wouldn't normally be entitled to.
And it's all about being aided by the media in this endeavor as well, because look, the sad fact is we've got a media that is owned by a handful of billionaires. A lot of them are non-doms, not even based in the UK, the likes of Rupert Murdoch, obviously, and the others. And these billionaires, these media moguls, are only interested in whipping up culture wars and in whipping up, disengagement in politics. Because if people are engaged in politics, if people know what's going on, if people have clearly shaped ideologies and an idea of what kind of world they want to build, they will go out there on the streets. They'll question politicians. They'll be active. They'll analyze the media between the lines, and it's in the interest of both establishment politicians, but also the establishment media to keep that silent and to keep that suppressed. And it's tragic, really, because I think, look, working class people have been degraded by the media, being painted as scroungers, being painted as, the insults have just been going on for years alongside the political project of austerity. And both of these things have really been disengaging people from politics. Turnouts have been falling. People have just sort of taken a back seat because of this, because of not being inspired in the prospect of change. And it is quite sad to see, because I want a world where people are really involved, active, getting out on the streets, getting on protests, street stalls, talking about politics and their daily lives, and especially working class people as well. I grew up in a working class community after moving to Scotland. Had to use food banks a couple of times, and experienced like what poverty, relative poverty, but what relative poverty looks like. And it is rare, sadly, tragically, that people from these sort of backgrounds get involved in politics, and it's tragic.
Yeah. Well, you know what they say, the old cliche, which is that revolutions don't happen when the poor march, but when the lawyers do. Charles Smith has asked a question. He says, has the youth wing a preferred strategy for independence?
Hi, so I'm on the NEC of the SNP Youth Wing, the YSI, and basically just had a conference in Stirling 2 weeks ago, and we had conversations about independence and about what we're going to do in the run-up. So the strategy is basically visibility, making sure that we are, active in the streets, whether it's doing street stalls, whether it's, dropping leaflets. I think the SNP is producing a leaflet that is set to go out to, hundreds of thousands of homes. And there's obviously been another one already last year, 8-page Yes leaflet together with the National and Leaving Scotland. So it's on the ground campaigning, but it's also digital campaigning, making sure that we produce infographics and videos and so on. But the most exciting aspect of it for me, as the international officer for the YSI, is the international engagement that we do. We basically want to be Scotland's sort of unofficial ambassadors in the EU, in Nordic countries, to make sure that people understand what independence is about, to make sure that we link up and we create some personal connections that will make it easier for Scotland to, get recognised as an independent state. It is really important, and it's something that we often forget about, how crucial it is to make friends abroad, especially in Europe and especially in the EU. We need to get back into the EU as soon as possible, and that is the policy of the SNP and of the youth wing itself. And to do that, we need to actually make allies there and be properly understood. But it's not just that as well. Through international cooperation, we can learn a lot from each other as well. Scotland obviously has pretty limited powers right now. We can't do what the Danish government is doing or the Swedish government is doing simply because we can't borrow, for example, right? Or we haven't got the economic levers.
Yeah.
But once we get that, we can create some of the infrastructure and some of the kind of national architecture that shapes countries like Sweden and Denmark, and we can move towards that Nordic model. And I just came off a trip to Stockholm, actually. I was in Stockholm 3 weeks ago with the youth wing, meeting the youth wing of the Swedish Social Democrats, so the party of government in Sweden. And we had lots to learn from them, whether it's on housing or on transport. And they actually had lots to learn from us as well. They were asking us about, for example, tackling violent crime, right? It's a big issue in Stockholm, increasingly so. And obviously, the Glasgow strategy for violent crime, for example, has really borne fruit. And there's a lot to learn from that. They were interested in stuff like green energy, for example, and renewables, something that Scotland is leading on. So yeah, sorry for sort of rambling on, but the strategy is basically 3 prongs. It's ground engagement, it's digital engagement and ramping up some of the infographics and content to be shared, but it's also international engagement and doing a lot of the work behind the scenes to make friends in Europe. Yeah.
I'd like to come back to Europe in a second, if I may, because we interviewed some people from Europe for Scotland a couple of weeks ago. And of course, we recently had Anthony Barnett on. And, he's a leading player in all of that, open democracy, etc. And he was terrific. It was just super, because he talks about how important Scottish independence is for England, which sounds, on the face of it, somewhat ironic. But his rationale is very straightforward. He said he's not convinced that there's enough impetus because of the first past the post system. Even if you've got a great collection of progressive opinion, it doesn't necessarily manifest itself in seats.
Yeah.
So he's hoping that the English electorate may become galvanized by a change in the constitutional status of Scotland, which is an interesting perspective. But it's interesting that the European connection there. But I wanted to mention one other thing before I forget. There's a new series of Borgen on.
I've not started watching it yet, so don't.
Well,
but
I won't say too much about it, except the principal is now foreign secretary, and she has to deal with Greenland, where they've discovered oil.
Yeah, I've seen
and
that.
Greenland has autonomous status in Denmark. So it's a debate and a discussion about oil and the green agenda and how you work all that round and how she can keep her job, which is more to the point.
I'm really excited about this. I've been a follower of Borgen ever since it started, and it's just so gripping, and the way it's made as well, the cinematic quality. I love watching it in Danish as well, and sort of picking up phrases here and there. The only bits of Danish that I know is like media stuff and political gossip stuff. A couple of phrases here and there. But yeah,
it's pronounced "ut" sometimes, but
yeah. Very
and
similar.
They talk about the Polish.
Like, a lot of features of Scandinavian languages are quite similar to Scottish. Obviously, you've got Kirka in Danish, and we've got Kirk in Scotland, and hus and house. Again, it's actually Scots and Nordic languages have a lot of connection.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, we interviewed Billy Kay, and if you haven't read his book, I would strongly recommend it.
Big admirer of his, yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. Let's move on to the questions again. Nancy McIver is asking, Olaf, how old were you when you decided Scotland needed its independence, and when did you decide to get involved?
So, as many people have decided that Scotland needs independence in 2014. I was 19, I think, at the time, just at university in Aberdeen. And look, I wasn't very political growing up. My family is very apolitical, and my family is very disillusioned in politics, you could actually say. It might be an immigrant thing, possibly. It might be, growing up in relative poverty and simply not having the energy to get involved in politics. So my family is quite apolitical. My dad's actually got a history of political activism in Poland in the 80s against the communist regime, and he was part of the Solidarity movement. He's done lots of interesting things. He met the likes of Lech Wałęsa and so on. But back to independence and my involvement. I got involved in 2014. In the spring of 2014, when the campaign was really, ramping up, and there was just a whole host of, street stalls, and you remember all this energy and the spontaneous events, and the likes of National Collective were doing really cool things. And I went to the Yestival organized by them, and there was just, lots of energy from the bottom up, from the ground up. And I really got inspired by that sort of positive vision. It was a very positive campaign. It was relentlessly about, Scotland's potential. Yes, of course, there was talk about how bad Westminster is, but the majority of that was hope and optimism. And to me, that campaign made it look to me that politics is the art of the possible. It's about, empowerment, and it's about, building something from scratch and involving people in it. So I got really inspired. By, I think, June or July 2014, I was out on the streets basically every day, every single day up until September the 18th, leafletting and canvassing and whatnot. And then after the independence referendum, I got involved in the SNP, joined the party in, I think, December 2014, something like that. And yeah, ever since then, I've just been really active in the movement, in the SNP, and various sort of initiatives like that. Yeah.
Isn't there an irony here, though? Because young people do respond to positive messages. Old people, on the other hand, don't nearly so much. And one of the issues here, and it's a leftover from 2014, because I suspect that the Yes campaign, and they may accept this themselves, didn't quite achieve the inroads into the over 55 voting population that they did with, say, the under 25. And even now, even after all these years have passed, if you look at the polls, and you have to trust some of them, I guess, under 25s, you're looking at 75% support for independence. You get exactly the opposite effect when you go beyond 60. So the great irony here, it seems to me, is if you run a very positive campaign, all you do is reinforce and reinvigorate the people who are young, but you actually miss out because you don't use any negative campaigning. You miss out on what motivates older people. And what motivates older people, by and large, is not hope, it's fear.
Yeah.
And in fact, when the No campaign won the 2014 election, they actually called their business Project Fear.
Yeah.
Because they knew that there was no trouble. There was no point in trying to address people under 25. You're going to lose. What's the point? But there's a big point in addressing people over 60. And the only way you can get to them really is to say, look, you're going to lose your pension, stuff like that. And that's what I discovered on the doors, by the way. So my broader question is this. Would it not be more fruitful for the Yes campaign to focus more of its efforts on the older generation?
Look, I think it's definitely important. Obviously, demographics are on our side. If you look at polling, I think under 55s, certainly under 45s now support independence by quite a big margin. I think under 35 support independence by 65 to 35%. So the demographics are on our side, but obviously it is important that we persuade the demographic that is most likely to turn out. Older people turn out to a much greater extent than younger people. And I don't necessarily think that we should be duplicating the Project Fear tactics. I think that's actually quite toxic for political discourse. And the one beautiful thing about 2014 is that the turnout was so high because people were really inspired by this message of hope and by the opportunity to actually vote for something that is going to transform Scotland. And I think if we have a lot of Project Fear about this, that's just going to disengage a section of society that we have to engage. We have to reach out to the working classes as well and get the people on the schemes to vote and to be enthusiastic about politics again. But in terms of answering some of the questions to elderly people, I think, look, really important that we have rock solid answers on things like pensions, on things like the economy. But it's also important that we remind people that there's a risk to being in the union as well. There's a risk to being tied to Westminster. I think a lot of people still assume that just because we're in the UK, we've got this strength and stability and these mystical, broad shoulders of the union, right? These broad shoulders of the union are creating the biggest inflation in Europe at the moment, the worst cost of living crisis in decades, the lowest growth in the G20 and the OECD, as you've said in your intro, John. And I know the highest poverty, the highest inequality, the worst pensions in the developed world as well. So there's a lot of metrics that just speak for themselves, and you can have all the rhetoric about the broad shoulders of the union that you want. You can have all the talk about strength and stability and equal partnership and all that, but the stats and the truth doesn't lie. And it's important that we keep stressing that we show that with the likes of Boris Johnson, with the likes of hard right ideological Tory governments, we're not safe. That doesn't bring stability. Brexit isn't an example of stability. Brexit is an example of an economic revolution that is hurting ordinary people, while the likes of Jacob Rees-Mogg and the hedge funders are raking it in. So it's important that we keep emphasizing that, but that is not the means in itself. We always have to thread in a message of hope and positivity and sort of what kind of country we want to build after this, right?
Yeah,
it's not enough to say Westminster isn't working. We have to also say this is the kind of Scotland that we want.
Yeah.
This is what independence is.
I suspect we're singing from the same hymn sheet. My concern was that if you simply focus on hope all the time, it's a bit like a golfer with only one club. You need a couple of 3 other clubs in there, and you use them as befits the situation. I mean, for example, in 2014, there was a great debate about currency. Now, you could equally have gone down the route, maybe now more than 2014, by saying, look here, there's nothing terribly commendable about the pound, and explaining 1 or 2 of the points that you just made. Now, some people would say, well, that's fear. But that's reality too. I mean, it's easy to take anything that sounds not hopeful and classify it as being fearful. But the reality is that's how life is. Nobody runs a life that I'm aware of where there's no risk involved in their life. And in fact, the philosopher said, the unexamined life is not worth leading. So, it's a perfectly reasonable it's part of the human condition. And it seems to me it's perfectly reasonable to accentuate that where you need to do so.
Yes, and I think there isn't enough emphasis on the fact that, exactly as you said, there's risk on both sides, and you've got to be realistic about some challenges of independent Scotland, and it may not be easy. It may not be the magic bullet that's going to instantly solve the issues that like poverty and inequality. That's going to take time, but the union is not working, and we've seen that, and you see that on the streets, and you see that in people's pockets and so on. And I think if we only focus on hope, and if we only focus on looking at the positive side of things, we let Westminster off the hook, and we validate this idea that the union is somehow this beacon of stability. And it's really important to challenge that. It's really important to show the facts and the reality, like inflation, like cost of living, like the cost of Brexit.
You mentioned digital media earlier. I mean, one of the downsides about social media, digital media, is there's lots of abuse. I mean, you've experienced some of that, haven't you?
Hi. I mean, look, I was a candidate in the council elections in Fife, in Burnt Island, where I live, and I've been getting quite a stream of abuse, especially in the run-up to the election when we had the First Minister visiting us here in Burnt Island, and before that as well, just of, frankly, unionist trolls hiding behind the cloak of anonymity, questioning my involvement in politics because I'm not a UK citizen, because I wasn't born in Scotland. There's a lot of people that seem to believe that if you live in a country, but we're not born in this country, you shouldn't be allowed in this country's politics, which I think, frankly, is a lot of nonsense. And
it would rule out Boris Johnson.
Exactly. There we go. He was born in New York. So I think there's a lot of desperation on the unionist side. And there's just a lot of vitriol. And this is the one downside of digital media. I do think that social media is overall a very good thing. And it allows shows like these to happen. It gives a platform to alternative media, which otherwise wouldn't have a platform. So, it's really important that we support work like this, that we tune into things like Indie Live and so on, that we, share information and disseminate information that is not available in the mainstream. It's a good way of connecting to folk as well. And, I'm chatting to friends across continents thanks to social media, which wouldn't be possible otherwise. So it's a very good thing. But it does come with a lot of toxicity and vitriol. And, and we've got to combat that. And whether it's on our side, in the Yes movement, there is vitriol and hate in the Yes movement as well. And where we see it, we have to challenge it. But primarily it's coming from the unionist side and from some of the, George Galloway aligned trolls, it seems like. And abuse is not easy to take. I've had moments where I've had to mute my notifications because I've been getting, threats and people saying that they want to come up to my door and whatever. Really insulting stuff a lot of the time. But look, it's tragically, it's part and parcel of politics, and it shouldn't be. It should never be. Nobody should have to go through this. And I'm just going to keep fighting it and calling it out, and that's it.
Well, the UK government have said that they're going to try and restrict abusive comments through some legislation. Do you think that would work?
I think so. I think, look, ultimately the abuses are always on the front foot because you can keep creating anonymous accounts. You can always find ways around it, to be honest. And I feel like a lot of the time in the online sphere, legislation is always 2 steps behind the current trend, So it's going to help a wee bit. It's definitely important to regulate this because it is a pretty unregulated space compared to many other, spaces. But I think what's more important is to tackle the culture. And you can have the regulation, you can have the laws outlawing hate speech and so on. That's important. But I think what matters is, firstly, having diverse people in politics, whether it's New Scots, whether it's people of colour, more women in politics, having a really diverse space and having people challenge bigotry where they see it. Because it's very easy to post bigoted abuse from the cloak of anonymity, but a lot of people just, even if they don't like it, even if they don't like seeing it, they will not challenge it because of, why would you? And it's important to just show a bit more solidarity, I think, with different groups that are being abused. I don't like to be treated as a token for online abuse because I don't have it as bad as, say, for example, women in politics or Muslim women in politics or lots of other people that get awful abuse on a daily basis. Anam Kaysar, the new MP for Edry and Shot, she's getting awful stuff. Mary Black and likes a young working class woman in politics. So I want to tackle this because I want everybody to be safe in online spaces. I want everybody to focus on substance and on policy and on ideas and interaction and not have to go through notifications and see awful bile. And I think it's a common fight.
Talking about ideas, what was your feeling at the end? You stood for councillor, is that right? You just said
that's right. Yeah.
What was your feeling at the end of that experience? I mean, did you find it rewarding or just a pain in the tonsils?
Well, firstly, it was an honour that my local branch, nominated me and then wanted me to stand, and it was really interesting to chat to a lot of people on the doorsteps. It was my first time ever running for an election, so thousands of conversations that I've had on street stalls and doorsteps and stuff, and really enlightening stuff. And it was good because we talked a lot about ideas for changing the community, whether it's funding better public transport, whether it's making use of solar energy in sunny Burnt Island, one of the sunniest places in Scotland. Lots and lots of different cool ideas that we had. But that was coupled a lot of the time with the realization that the powers are quite limited, and it's powers of councils that are limited and limited resources, but also powers of Scotland. The Scottish government can't do a lot of these things, let alone councils. And that goes back to the need to be independent. That goes back to having those essential powers that a lot of countries take for granted, like Sweden, like Denmark, like Norway, and stuff that we we simply can't do because our hands are tied. But yeah, ideas. It was really interesting. I kind of thought, on one hand, there was a creeping sense of disengagement in some of the more working class parts of my ward. It was sad to see that a lot of people were just like, oh, they're all the same. Politicians are all the same. Terrible. You're all a bunch of liars. It's pretty disappointing to see that. I was still engaging with that. I like to chat to people that I disagree with. I like to chat to everyone and not shut people out. But on the other hand, there was also a lot of energy and lots of people wanting to, make a change from the bottom up and wanting to harness some of the spirit of like community politics that we had in COVID. So yeah, it was really interesting. It was good experience. And yeah, didn't get elected.
I chaired a couple of meetings on problems at Musmoran a couple of years ago.
All right.
And we had no trouble activating people.
Yeah.
We just opened the doors and a couple of 300 or 400 people would turn up. My experience was, provided you can reach the issues that people are concerned about, then you'll have no trouble enthusing people. I mean, at one point we had to close the doors because we had so many people who were so concerned about what was happening at Musmoran. And it took about 3 meetings to persuade Shell to send a representative. Exxon never did. But that's their loss, in my humble opinion. But the interaction between SEPA on the stage, the oil companies, and the politicians, councillors, MSPs, etc. Just for me, it was, as chair, it was a very enriching experience because we took questions from the floor. So people had to be prepared. They had to have reasonable responses to reasonable questions. And most of the questions, by the way, were reasonable. One of the reasons for that was I wouldn't hear any questions that weren't reasonable. So anyone who wanted to go into, oh, I hate so and so, but forget it. You're lost. You're finished. Sit down. But I found people to be plugged in, interested, activated, enthused. And it then struck me that if you could bring that, if you could bottle that and bring it to politics, I mean, it would be such an important factor.
We need it so badly. I think again, that is the opposite, the counter to what the establishment media are trying to do in terms of disengaging people, in terms of breeding this kind of general sense of apathy, doing politics from the ground up. Making sure that we put community issues first, that we get people in the room. And by the way, in the room is much better than on Zoom. And I'm very glad that we're going back to things in person because people just don't want to do Zoom anymore. And I realized that we're doing this on Zoom basically, so the hypocrisy. But obviously it is much better to do things in person. And it's good. It's good that we're going back to that, to this engagement. We're still a wee bit off from the spirit of 2014, where we had packed town halls and really like radical engagement from the ground up. But I think we're getting there, and I think there's definitely appetite for that sort of engagement. So it's good to see that, and definitely in this campaign, we've had turnout here of 52%. Now comparing that to turnout in English local elections, for example, it's been a lot higher in England. I think it's been around 40. It's been higher than the average in Scotland as well. And I think doing politics from the ground up and listening to people and empowering people to make the voices heard, even if that results in hours-long conversations, that's what we need.
I think too that I think polling makes a difference in the sense of pre-polling to establish precisely what the issues are.
Yeah.
Because political parties, bless their cotton socks, need to look at a national position very often. And that means that the focus is on the big picture. But very often what motivates the person next door or the person at the end of the street got nothing to do with the big picture. At least I've discovered that when I've done polling. Is that you go and say, what does it motivate you? And you get an extraordinary response back. It has to be done professionally, of course, so you have to spend some money. But it can be very, very powerful because then you know in advance that what you say aligns with the concerns that people have. Yeah. And then once you've done that, you can then talk about other stuff. But until you make that point of access, it's really hard. It's uphill struggle most of the way. Which brings me to what troubles a lot of people about the next referendum, let's say, is they look at what happened at Brexit and they look at Donald Trump, and they both made very, very interesting approaches to big data. I mean, Trump in particular collected big data and then used digital platforms to reach out to individuals and say, look, here's my Trump message to you if you're in favor of gun control, and to your next door neighbor who's opposed to gun control, here's my message to you and why you should both vote for me. Yeah. And you think that, I mean, you're talking big bucks, but big data and artificial intelligence seem to be in a position increasingly where they can reach out to individuals in a way that a leaflet just cannot do. And no disrespect to the folks who produce leaflets. I've produced a bunch of them myself over the years, but I've always been conscious of the fact that most of them end up in the bin. Whereas social media, very different.
Yeah.
Because it has an impact.
No, look, 100%. And are you still there? I think you've cut off.
Yeah.
Lost you. Yeah, you're back. Look, it's crazy. Only 20 years ago, politics was all about, here's a TV advert, here's a massive banner, here's a leaflet, and messaging was very centralized. You have one message from the top down delivered to different audiences, different demographics, and that was the message, right? What you have right now is through things like Facebook, micro-targeting in particular, but also just, metadata and tags and so on, you can have hundreds, if not thousands of different messages, adjust it to micro groups. And I'm not talking about groups like over 60s or women or students. I'm talking about a 19-year-old student in Cowdenbeath interested in gardening, right? The tiniest groups. And it is a very new way of doing politics. I feel like a lot of us haven't adjusted to that yet. It definitely comes with a lot of dangers, because if you look at the Cambridge Analytica scandal, a lot of that micro-targeting has led to, the election of Trump. It led to things like Brexit. But it's also led to polluting of the political discourse in many senses, because you have a situation where, one person gets this message and the person literally next door in the same street gets a completely different message, just based on their interests or whatever they liked on Facebook or whatnot. So, it kind of erodes trust in politics a wee bit, and I think it's important for us to recognize that. It can be very useful as well, because micro-targeting can allow you to answer lots of different questions, very specific to groups that are quite niche in society, right? Like the whole society may not be interested in the lobster industry, right? Or in, I don't know, very, very, certain niche things. And that allows you to sort of answer some of the questions that would not be on the national stage otherwise. So it's got potential, but I am suspicious about some of the malicious actors, like the likes of Trump and Brexiteers and so on, that are trying to use it in a very malicious way. But yeah, that's definitely what the future holds. That's where we're at. There isn't really going back from it. I'm still a fan of on the ground campaigning, and digital is hugely important, but nothing really beats that energy of just chatting to people face to face and understanding what drives them, what motivates them. That's what I got into politics for. That's what I love doing during the election campaign. That's what I love doing, during the referendum, and I can't wait to get back in the streets again.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very powerful, the mano a mano, face to face, because you can interrogate and you can get a response and you can then return and all the rest of it. But it is I agree with you. I think it's a concern for many people that the next independence referendum will feature to a very large extent the use of big data, micro-targeting, in ways that is uncontrolled. I mean, for example, the law doesn't cover any of this stuff.
No.
So I can make up any story about the SNP I like and send it to everyone who's interested in curling, send it to only people over 65 who's interested in curling, and say, look, the SNP is going to ban curling. I mean, I know that sounds silly and stupid.
And that's exactly how disinformation is being spread, because, it's sent to a small population. So the usual media don't have access to this sort of stuff. They don't even realize that this is being peddled. Meanwhile, the lie or the misinformation just allows itself to spread and is being shared within these bubbles because it's not being seen by anyone who could challenge it. And it's just very toxic. It can be very toxic. So it's important to tackle that and counter that with on-the-ground campaigning, but also with having our own strong digital assets and having our own networks. And I think in particular, private sharing has become massively important. So, sending a message to your pals or your family on WhatsApp, forwarding it to 5 or 10 people, if you do that, you can have a chain effect of reaching tens of thousands of people in a couple of clicks. And that's free, by the way, because you have the likes of Trump and Tories and Brexit and so on spending literally millions on micro-targeting and on these very sophisticated data analysis, big data techniques, but actually, doorstep conversations, private sharing, and so on, all of that is quite effective and it's free and it's something that we can all do. So, yeah.
So if you were advising somebody who has quite a few friends on social media, that's the advice you would give them. Make sure that you're looking at the messages, make sure that you get a chance to repeat them, etc. Because it's significant, perhaps, that if you look at the readership patterns of people under 25, relatively few compared to over 60s read newspapers.
Yeah,
they get a lot of data from people like Olaf Stando, who's a friend, and they trust you, but they don't trust the Daily Mail. They don't read the Daily Mail.
Yeah, exactly. No, exactly. And there's just enormous power in this idea of, look, you found an interesting video debunking some of the myths on currency, right? Or debunking some of the myths about pensions or whatever, whether it's from the official SNP or Yes channels, or whether it's from, great stuff that Believe in Scotland do, or the National or Independence Live or whatever. And if you forward that to a couple of friends, it gets seen. It doesn't get affected by the algorithm, which Facebook pages are often subjected to, because remember, Facebook pages are designed to get you to promote, to pay for advertising. Organically, posts are seen by about 10-15% of people. And the rest of the audience of a page is blocked from seeing something because Facebook wants you to pay and to boost it and to get into their revenue. So I think private sharing on WhatsApp, on Messenger, is really important, and it's something that we have to kind of emphasize more. Every time that we see a good piece of content, sure, retweet it, share it on Facebook, but send it to 5 friends as well, because that's a really easy way of making sure it goes viral and we spread the message. So
talking about things going viral, how many Twitter followers do you have?
Well, I've got I think 13 or 14,000 at the moment.
14,000.
Yes, but I think that isn't that important, to be honest. I'm just an ordinary citizen. But yeah.
Okay, we haven't got a lot of time left, but is there anything that you would like to talk about that we haven't had a chance to raise so far? This is your chance.
Put me on the spot there. I think really just the price of being in the union, and I think I'm so passionate about this idea of challenging the status quo of Westminster and this idea that the union brings stability. These statistics from OECD today showing that growth is going to be the lowest in the G20. That didn't get that much coverage in the BBC. That didn't get that much coverage in the mainstream media. Surprise, surprise. And it is something that is going to define the UK economy in the next few months and years. At the moment, what the Westminster government is doing is a race to the bottom, whether it's a race to the bottom on workers' rights, on food standards, with deals like Australia, New Zealand undercutting our Scottish farming, a race to the bottom on all sorts of things, cutting our living standards, pushing people into poverty. All of that is really, really worrying. And I'm seeing people, my neighbors, people that I've been chatting to on doorsteps during the campaign, struggling to keep their homes, going to food banks. It's just horrific, and it's just going to get worse. And I think this is why we need to have the powers of independence, because independence a lot of the time is seen by people as a sort of like luxury, right? Oh, we're Scottish, it's about identity. We want to have our country because that's what we fancy. Whereas actually, at a time like this, at a cost of living crisis, independence is not a luxury; it's a lifeboat, and it gives us the power to, for example, borrow to fund the public services properly. It gives us the power to tax wealth and to tax businesses properly in a way that the UK government has failed to do. It gives us the power to do things like Norway and like Sweden and like Finland, to actually have proper public services, proper social security that's based on, you know, fairness and dignity and not on cuts. It gives us powers to get rid of our nuclear weapons, which are in our shores. You know, independence is essential and independence is normal, and it's something that we really have to keep stressing on the doorsteps. It's not a luxury, it's not a fantasy, it's not about flags, it's not about identity, it's not about, you know, wanting to have it for its own sake. It's about wanting to build a better society, to depart from the Westminster austerity, depart from the cuts. And listen, if Ireland can do it, if Iceland can do it, if Luxembourg can do it, if Austria and Poland and Latvia can do it, all countries that have, you know, nowhere near the amount of resources that Scotland has. So
but surely, let me be devil's advocate for a second. But surely what you're talking about is breaking up families. You're talking about a border at Berwick and between England and Scotland. You're actually at a time when we all should be coming together. We've got issues like Ukraine, we've got COVID, we've got global warming. And what you're talking about is dividing up the nation.
I don't think it's about dividing at all. It's actually about bringing equality to the table, right? If you think about, you know, Scotland has not been getting its way ever since 1955, to be honest. We haven't voted for a Tory government since 1955, right? The last person that was able to vote then, because voting age was 21 at the time, was born in 1934, right?
But nonetheless, you're going to stick up a border between England and Scotland.
No, but hold on. It's not about sticking up a border. It's about having a partner that is going to collaborate with England on the big issues like climate change, on the big issues like trade, etc. That's going to be England's best friend. That's going to be an economic partner, a social partner. We're not going to be breaking up anything. We're going to be creating a union of equals that is actually about equality. The unionists like to talk about the union of equals while disrespecting Scotland at every turn, while grabbing powers and while imposing Brexit on us. So it's not about breaking up. We have lots of, you know, English people involved in the campaign, Polish people like myself. I've got Portuguese friends and I've got Lithuanian friends who are involved in the campaign. It's not about blood and soul nationalism. It's not about breaking up families. It's about making sure that Scotland has its own voice, that Scotland, you know, that things aren't being done to Scotland, but that we, the people that live in Scotland, shape Scotland's future. And that's not radical, that's common sense. And I think as we get towards that referendum, which we need so badly, we have to keep emphasizing that. And we have to keep reminding people that there is no status quo. There is no 2014 union. It doesn't exist anymore. And there is no such thing as strength and stability of the union. It is actually risky and it's costly. And I can't wait to, you know, get on the streets and make that case.
Good. Well, I think you'll be very effective when you hit the streets, I have to say. I need to tell people, by the way, while we've been talking, to Kevin, our producer, has been running a Facebook poll. The question was, do you think BBC Scotland News is impartial? Well, 9% of you said yes, 86% said no, and that was 199, and 5 of you said a wee bit. A wee bit impartial sounds like me, like being a wee bit pregnant, but there you go.
And that's why we need, you know, strong independent media in Scotland.
You better believe it. Okay, we need to wrap things up there, Olaf. Thank you very much. It's been very enlightening and educational. I hope you've enjoyed yourself. And I hope all of you watching have enjoyed the program too. You know, as we often say, this is your show. Big thanks to Olaf. Big thanks to all of you for watching tonight. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Again, we have a great list of formidable guests lined up for future shows. We'll be back next week at the same time, where we'll be talking to singer Iona Fife.
She's great, by the way.
Mark it in your diary.
I've seen it too.
You've got Olaf's endorsement as well as everyone else.
Well, thank you so much, John. Really enjoyed this. It's been very enlightening.
You're very welcome. And as always, a reminder to look out for my column in the Sunday National this weekend. You'll find it in the 7-day supplement. I may well be mentioning the show. I may be mentioning other stuff. Oh, and please don't forget, Europe for Scotland have their show starting on this channel, Indie Live, on June 23rd. Mark that in your diary too, please.
Absolutely.
So to all of you